diver led 3 companions into an underwater cave for an exploration dive. But when he turned around, the other 3 had mysteriously vanished. He immediately swam back to search for them, but after searching the cave for a long time, he found nothing. Even worse, he realized he had entered an unknown passage. With his gas supply running low, he desperately searched for an exit in the pitch-black cave. But because no guideline had been laid, he completely lost his sense of direction. Where did his companions go? And could he make it out alive? This is the tragic cave diving incident at Bosey Spring. On the border between Switzerland and Italy lies a small town called Aragno. To the east of the town stands Monte Generoso. At the foot of the mountain, beside a major international highway, there is a natural spring. This is where today's story takes place. The Sorgent Bossi, also known simply as Bossi Spring. From the outside, Bossi Spring looks completely ordinary, nothing more than a small, unremarkable pond. Beneath the spring, however, lies a vast and complex karst limestone cave system. In the late 1970s, Primo Meli became the first person to explore the cave, reaching a depth of about 47 meters. In 1983, Solberg and his team pushed deeper to around 68 meters, and discovered that Bossi Spring actually had 2 separate entrances. These 2 passages merge at a depth of roughly 60 meters underwater. Then, in 1985, Walter Cusin and others continued the exploration, eventually reaching the cave's deepest known point at 89 meters. This section is the cave's first siphon passage. The tunnel is extremely narrow, barely wide enough for a single diver to squeeze through. After passing this point, the cave begins to slope upward. Over the following decades, explorers discovered additional passages on the right side, as well as a second siphon. At the very end of the cave, there is even a dry chamber connected to the system. And beyond that, no one knows how deep the cave truly goes. On October 29, 2006, a 4-man dive team prepared to explore the cave. The divers came from both Italy and Switzerland, and all of them were highly experienced in cave diving. The leader of the team was Ronco Favaro. Their exploration project was planned in several stages. The ultimate goal was to reach and map the dry chamber located in the far right section of the cave system. But getting there required passing through a 625-meter-long underwater tunnel. Although the distance itself was not especially long, the cave contained numerous side passages, tight restrictions, and thick layers of silt. The dive was far from easy. As the cave map shows, the entire system forms a V-shaped profile, with an average slope of nearly 40 degrees, and a maximum depth of 89 meters. That also meant the team would need to perform decompression stops, both on the way in and on the return trip from the dry chamber. The exploration on October 29th was only the first stage of their overall plan. For this dive, they intended to explore only the area around 20 meters deep on the right side of the cave. Because of that, they placed just 4 sets of decompression cylinders on the left side of the system. After completing their standard pre-dive checks, team leader Ronco Favaro entered the water first, with the others following behind. The entrance passage was fairly tight, but after swimming forward for a few meters, the tunnel opened up into a much wider section. The cave floor was covered with fallen rocks, and fish occasionally swam past the divers. One important detail was that, although the 4 men were diving together, each of them was technically conducting an independent solo dive. In other words, none of them had a true dive buddy assigned to them. Still, during the dive, they never strayed too far from one another. Before long, they reached the deepest section of the cave, a narrow passage about 20 meters long. The entrance to this restriction was extremely tight, forcing the 4 divers to pass through one at a time. In the end, all of them made it through safely without incident. Afterward, the tunnel began sloping upward again, with a gradient similar to the left side of the cave. The major difference was that the right side passages consisted largely of mixed rock and clay. Large amounts of mud clung to both the ceiling and the floor, meaning that even a diver's spin kicks, or exhaust bubbles, could cause clay to break loose, rapidly reducing visibility inside the cave. The loose rocks scattered across the bottom also suggested that collapses occurred here frequently. Falling debris could potentially block the passage entirely, so moving through this area required extreme caution. When the team finally reached the 20-meter deep area on the right side, they stopped as planned. By that point, the day's survey mission was essentially complete. The team then began their return journey. On the way back, because Ronco Favaro was the most experienced diver, and moved far more efficiently than the others, he quickly pulled far ahead of the remaining 3. After passing through a narrow and confusing junction, Ronco continued forward alone. Only after some time did he think to turn around and check on his teammates. But when he looked back, visibility had dropped to less than half a meter, and the others had mysteriously disappeared. By this point, their movement through the cave, combined with the huge amount of exhaust bubbles they produced, had already stirred up the silt covering the passageways. Ronco waited for the others to catch up, but even after several minutes, no one appeared. Fearing that something had happened to his teammates, he immediately turned back to search for them, but because visibility was now almost non-existent, he accidentally entered the wrong tunnel at the junction. In reality, the signs that he had taken the wrong route were obvious. The water in this passage suddenly became much clearer, and there was no guideline along the bottom. Yet, for some reason, Ronco failed to notice either warning sign. He continued swimming deeper into the wrong passage, until eventually reaching a dead end. Only then did he realize he had made a mistake. He immediately turned around, but the silt he had disturbed on the way in had now reduced visibility even further, wasting precious time during his return. When he finally made it back to the original junction, he relocated the guideline. The water around him was still completely clouded, and there was still no sign of his teammates. Ronco assumed they had probably already exited the cave, so he began descending to catch up with them. But at that moment, he realized his gas consumption was far beyond what he had planned for. The detour into the wrong tunnel had cost him dearly. Ronco became increasingly anxious, and started kicking harder to swim faster, but his panic and frantic movements only caused his gas supply to drain even more rapidly. That realization made him even more desperate. As soon as he reached the entrance to the deep restriction, he hurried inside, hoping to pass through it as quickly as possible, and reached the point where the decompression cylinders had been staged. But the more he panicked, the slower his progress became. He struggled violently through the tight passage. His anxiety soon turned into terror, and finally despair. That emotional collapse caused his breathing rate and gas consumption to skyrocket. By the time he squeezed through the first restriction, his bottom gas supply was almost completely exhausted. Just before entering the second narrow section, Ronco suddenly began convulsing violently. A short while later, the struggle stopped. Alone in the darkness and panic of the cave, Ronco met his end. Meanwhile, Ronco's 3 teammates were conducting decompression stops at a depth of 21 meters in the left side passage. Because they had not seen Ronco Favaro anywhere during the return, and none of the staged decompression cylinders showed signs of being used, the 3 men realized that something had likely gone wrong. But they did not have enough reserve gas for a rescue attempt, nor had any standby support divers been arranged for the dive. There was nothing they could do. All they could do was remain in place and complete their required decompression stops. More than an hour later, the 3 divers finally surfaced and immediately contacted the authorities. The rescue team quickly arrived at the scene. They repeatedly searched the passage within 60 meters on the left side, but found nothing. On the following afternoon, the second search began. By then, the mission had shifted from rescue to recovery. The rescue team speculated that Ronco was likely trapped inside a side passage on the right side. However, to search the right side, they first needed to place backup air tanks along the route. But while heading in to deploy the cylinders, the rescuers discovered Ronco's body at the bottom of the cave. His equipment was completely intact. The regulator had fallen out of his mouth. Both his main tank and stage bottle were empty. Later, the forensic examination concluded that Ronco died from drowning, meaning water entered his lungs after he ran out of breathing gas. The direct causes of this accident were insufficient gas preparation and extremely poor visibility. But the deeper cause was overconfidence, and that overconfidence was reflected in 3 specific ways. The first problem was the lack of gas redundancy. Each diver in the team carried only 3 cylinders, with no backup gas supply available. As a result, Ronco was unable to remain at the bottom for very long. The second problem was the absence of a dive partner. When Ronco got into trouble, there was no one beside him to share breathing gas. The third problem was the lack of support divers, combined with the absence of backup gas. Even though his teammates realized something had likely gone wrong, no one was able to immediately descend and search for him. In the end, all of these factors together led to the tragedy.